Welcome. So my name is Elizabeth Drembus, for those who I haven't had a chance to meet yet. I am the genealogist with the William and Mary Bray School Lab. My role is to lead the genealogical efforts to find the descendants of the children who attended the Williamsburg Bray School, which was in existence from 1760 to 1774. So in service to the Bray School Lab's mission to uncovering and documenting, preserving and disseminating the history and legacies of the Williamsburg Bray School, we are hosting a monthly series. I'm going to let more people in. There we go. We are hosting a monthly series on Zoom in order to share recent genealogical findings, engage the descendant community in this work in order to broaden our understanding of the legacies of the Bray School, and enlist the help of historians, genealogists, as well as the general public in furthering the conversations and the research surrounding the Williamsburg Bray School. The title of the monthly series is Bray School Stories, and this evening's focus is on one scholar in particular. That scholar is Molly. So first, some housekeeping items. For those of you who have just joined us, I want you to be aware that we are recording this session. It will be available later on our YouTube channel, and to find it, you'll simply you'll Google Bray School Lab YouTube. And if you prefer not to be recorded, please feel free to access this later from our YouTube channel. The monthly sessions are designed to spark conversation. I'm going to share a slide and some information, and then we'll pause to take questions and invite for you to share your thoughts as well as your comments. Questions, of course, can always be placed in the chat and or raised during the following each slide. So a new feature this evening is something that came out of last month's session. I'm going to share a link to a Google Drive that has the images of all the documents referenced throughout this particular session. So I'm happy to answer questions and hear comments on the documents as well as the genealogical research. So let me go ahead and go to my Google Drive. Second, let me see. There we go. So. Okay, so into the chat. I'm going to put the link here. So that will allow you to access the Google Drive and to actually, did that come up? No, that just went to everybody. Let's do this.
It just went to me, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm just seeing that now. Here we go. Okay. So there is the link to the Google Drive. You should be able to pull up the documents and also access them after the session is over as well. And so let's go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can do this. Share, and I'm going to start here, and we've got somebody coming in. All right. There we go. Is everybody seeing the Bray School Stories Finding Molly screen? Terrific. Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. So let's go ahead and start this. Okay. So welcome, everyone. This is the Bray School Stories. We're going to be discussing Molly. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Williamsburg Bray School, it was a school founded and supported financially by the Bray Associates of London. It was opened in September of 1760 in Williamsburg. It was one of 5 Bray schools in the colonies prior to the American Revolution. There were 3 attendance lists that survive from that time period: the 1762 list, the 1765 list, and the 1769 list. We know that those are the only 3 that we've found so far out of the 14 years that the school was in existence. We have a total of 80 some names for children. Some of them were duplicated over a couple from list to list. But we do estimate that close to 300 students probably were educated at the Williamsburg Bray School. And it was a school specifically designed for the teaching of reading, religion, and comportment, and some other domestic skills, primarily to enslaved children in Williamsburg, although we do have about 6 free Black students who attended the school. So as I mentioned, as a genealogist, I am responsible for researching and leading the efforts to research the genealogical lines of those students. It's definitely something I'm not doing by myself. I could not possibly do that. We have wonderful help from our descendant community members and partners in Williamsburg, as well as outside of Williamsburg. So that's a little background on the school and the work. And so tonight we're going to focus on Molly. So when we started, what we know about Molly is that she was described as Mrs. Prentice's Molly, and she is found on the November 1765 attendance list. And this was pretty much what we knew from the record, or from the letter that Robert Carter Nicholas sent to the Bray Associates. Robert Carter Nicholas was the trustee of the Williamsburg Bray School. And when he was in correspondence with the Bray Associates in London. And so from his letter, he said, "It's impossible for me to fix their ages, but I suppose them to be from about 4 to 10 years of age." So that gives us an approximate year of birth between 1755 and 1761. The 1762 list is the only list that actually gave us the children's ages. So the 1765 and the 1769 lists, we just don't have ages for them. The numbers that you see associated with these columns, these are the number of children coming from each of these enslaving households. So this is actually a transcription of the letter. We don't actually own the letters. The Bray Associates letters are all housed at Oxford University in London. We do have a subscription that we are able to see the original documents, and through our website and our research portal, you can also access those documents. But what we're doing at the William and Mary Bray School lab is that we are transcribing the records so that then we can use them, and we do own the transcriptions. The people actually doing the transcriptions are William and Mary students, and our Bray School graduate student lab partner is working with those undergraduate students to give them the opportunity to be involved in this research, learn some skills on transcribing, reading 18th century handwriting. So that's why we see a transcription here. So I'm happy to open it up for anybody who has any questions or comments from just where we began.
Elizabeth, how did the Bray documents come to end up in London?
So just a great question. So it was a London-based, England-based charity. And so they are the keepers of those documents. So so all of the letters that Robert Carter Nicholas was sending, and even the 2 trustees that preceded him, all of those letters, because they were sent from Williamsburg to London to the trustees, they were the keeper of those documents.
Thank you.
Thousands and thousands of pages, because not only was the Williamsburg Bray School one of the schools in the country, in the colonies, there were schools in Philadelphia, New York, Newport, Rhode Island, Williamsburg, of course, and Fredericksburg, Virginia. But we also know of Bray schools that were in Nova Scotia, as well as the West Indies. And so lots and lots of documents. We have barely scratched the surface on researching those. So we're hopeful that there are more documents to be found. They were transcribed by and published by John Van Horn years ago. And so at the time, I think the thinking was that these might be the only ones pertaining to the Williamsburg Bray School, but we're hopeful that with a little bit more digging in, a little bit more research, we'll be able to find some more. Any other comments or questions before we go on to the next slide? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So then the next steps were to figure out where we were going to go next. Oh, I'm going to let some more people in. Terrific. So where we go next is looking at the Prentice family. Anytime we are researching enslaved people in that colonial era and even into the antebellum period, it is important that we look at the enslaving family and really understand the white family and their makeup. And so if Molly is described as Mrs. Prentice's Molly, then we need to look at the Prentice family. As you can see, so these are two little snippets from William Prentice's will. The book is in pretty poor shape, but we had just some clues, and this is kind of put on your detective hat and kind of look at everything you can from even every little scrap of paper. So we knew that this was William Prentice's will. We know that he is from the city of Williamsburg. We are able to read that he was a merchant in town. We know that he had a wife named Mary, and that we were also able to see on the second page that he was giving to his daughter Elizabeth a woman, Judith, with her, and we don't know what that word was, but then also we see the word increase. So as genealogists, we're kind of used to that language in wills that basically would have meant that Judith was enslaved, and it could be with her increase would have indicated her children. So this is the first thing we looked at, and this was the will of William Prentice. And so then we were able to then look at, okay, what happens next? So when you're looking at wills, they write a will, then the person dies, then the normal course of action then would be that an inventory and an appraisal would be done on the estate. So any questions about these documents, or any questions about the use of wills when we're doing the research? Okay, I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. So what we were able to do then, let's see, there we go. All right. So in October of 1765, an appraisal was done on the estate of William Prentice. So William Prentice dies at this point. And remember that the letter that Robert Carter Nicholas wrote regarding Molly was written in November of 1765. So this was just after William Prentice dies. So the appraisers included Alexander Craig, Anthony Hay, and Edward Charlton. And the reason I bring that up is because all three of these men are also sending people to the Bray School. So we kind of get a sense of how interwoven the city of Williamsburg is in this time period, and also who the players are that are sending children to the Bray School. But it's through these records that we're able to reconstruct the family connections of the children, the scholars, going to the Bray School. And what we found in the estate appraisal is this line: Judith, Effie, Molly, and Jemmy, her children, given to Elizabeth Prentice, valued at 115 pounds. So here we see Molly. And we saw from the little snippet of the will that he was giving William Prentice was giving Molly was giving Judith and her increase to Elizabeth Prentice, his daughter. And here we have a record confirming that part that was kind of cut out from the will. here we have evidence of where Molly was going to be going next. But then we also see that Judith has children, which means Molly has a brother and a sister. Molly's sister is Effie, Molly's brother is Jemmy, and her mother is Judith. So we're reconstructing those family connections just from this record. So before I move on to the next screen, any questions, any concerns, anything that I can help answer?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Do we assume that these children are written in birth order of any kind? And were the other siblings also Bray School students?
So I don't tend to assume anything. It's actually a good question that Effie might be older than Molly. We do know, and we'll go to the next slide and I'll show you that Jemmy, we do have Jemmy's baptism record. So it could very well be that this is birth order. What we don't have is any indication that Molly's siblings went to the Bray School. The problem with having the attendance records not in consecutive years means we don't really get that continuation to see whether or not there were family, if we could really tie some family groupings. We do have one set of children that we do know are brothers and sisters because they actually do carry a last name, and that was Isaac B. and his sisters Joanna and Clara, and I'm forgetting the last one. I'm gonna forget the last one, but I don't want to make a mistake on that. So it's a good question. Right now, we don't have evidence that Effie and Jemmy went to the Bray School. No. All right.
You had a hand up, Janice's hand
Oh,
was up.
Oh, okay. Janet, thank you. Nada. Janice, do you have a question? Janice will be able to help me on the names.
Yeah, no, actually, I had a question.
Okay.
My question was when you were talking about, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me at all?
Ooh. Janice, your question isn't coming in through real clear.
Can you type the question, Janice?
Can you hear me now?
It's broken up, but yes, I can hear you.
I was just trying to ask when you spoke about the first document where the children are given in the will, and they speak of them as the increase. Does that I assume that means children that she would have because she didn't have any at that time? Because he names them later.
Right. I think that means any,
Is
yeah,
that a correct assumption?
I think that's an assumption that we can make, that it would be any, yes, children that she currently has and any children she would then subsequently have.
And when they speak about the increase, they're covering any children's time in the future down the road. So for generations.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's an important point. Yeah. It's a good point. Thank you for pointing that out. Anybody else with hands up that I can Okay, I'm going to go ahead on to the next slide. So 1765, just if we're keeping track, that's when William Prentice dies. And in 1765 is when Elizabeth Prentice would have then inherited, for lack of a better word, those enslaved people, Judith and Molly and Molly's siblings. What we're able to find looking into the Bruton Parish registers is the baptism record for, we have for Pompey, and he's listed Pompey, son of Judith, belonging to the estate of William Prentice, deceased. So this is before the estate may have been finalized and settled, but we do have a record of at least the mother being named in the baptism record, Pompey, son of Judith, belonging to the estate of William Prentice, deceased. Then we also have in 1768, so this is then 3 years after William Prentice's death, Nancy Lewis, daughter of Judith, belonging to Elizabeth Prentice. And it's curious that we see Lewis as possibly a surname, possibly as a middle name. But this could very well be the name of the surname of Nancy's father. We don't know. It's not in the record, but there are definitely some big clues that Lewis, seems to be something of a significant name here in this pattern. But again, we have daughter of Judith. So we're building Judith's family. We're putting this family back together that the record and slavery had been tearing apart. So any questions before we go on to, out of these two baptism records? And actually, I want to mention that the baptism records are available online. And you do have the link in both the bibliography as well as the image is there in the Google Drive. So some of it's hard, it has been transcribed. And so if you want to go and look at it and look at the other entries, we are really using these baptism records quite extensively as we can to put Bray School scholars back with at least their mothers. In many, many instances, the fathers are not named at all. But normally what's happening, what we're seeing is that its mothers are named and then the enslavers are named as well. So any questions regarding these documents? Yes, Yvonne.
I'm kind of curious about the transcriptions. I just learned recently that a lot of the students stopped learning how to write cursive. And in my research, I see a lot of mistakes on the transcriptions, and I don't know if it's students doing it or who's doing it or how long ago they started writing cursive. But it's things that I see that are obvious to me, and I don't know how they transcribed it that way. So I'm just kind of curious as to these students or whoever's doing the transcriptions, did they know how to write cursive writing themselves?
Right.
Did they learn that?
So I will, so let me answer. So as far as the transcriptions of the Bruton Parish Register, those were, I don't know who did those transcriptions. I don't know whether that was volunteers from the church. I don't know if it was volunteers from the community. Janice, do you happen to know? Or Jeanette, I don't know whether we know right now who did those transcriptions. And maybe I can ask, you know what, I can ask Nicole, because she may have some information on that. For the transcriptions that the William and Mary students are doing in the Bray School lab, yeah, the cursive has been a little bit of a challenge. And so what we're actually doing is using a software called Transcribus. And so we feed the document, the handwritten document, into the computer, or we scan and put the scan into Transcribus, and it gives us what's called a diplomatic transcription. So it's going to get all of that superscript, as well as very, very much what it looks like in the handwritten document, kind of typed. We do have the William and Mary students then going through to double check Transcribus's work. And you're right, the reading of 18th century handwriting and cursive is, it's a new skill for them, because I will tell you from my own children, in Virginia, they stopped teaching cursive. I think my son was in 2nd grade, which was a long time ago now. And they stopped teaching it. We were at a conference recently where somebody said, it was a teacher, and she mentioned the fact that she was berating why cursive was still being taught. Why was cursive still being taught? And this topic came up, and she's like, you have sold me. Now I know we need to have people who can read this writing, you know, going forward if we're going to be doing all this research. So, yeah.
I just imagine it looks like hieroglyphics to them. Even census as recent as 1950 have been
Yeah.
transcribed incorrectly.
Yeah, yeah. So we are trying to be, as far as the documents that the William and Mary Bray School, the Bray School Lab, our thought partners are doing, they put it through the software, then the students themselves read it, and then it goes through 2 more readings with Nicole and with our director, Dr. Maureen Elgersman Lee, to ensure accuracy. Absolutely. Yep. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions or comments? All right, we will go ahead forward. So this is basically, we're trying to reconstruct this family. And so what we've been able to do is now establish that Judith was the mom. Here's Molly, our Bray School scholar, her sister Effie, Jemmy, Pompey, and Nancy Lewis. And I think I mentioned that we had Jemmy's baptism record, but I don't have that as part of the of our presentation this evening because Jemmy was part of also the estate settlement. So, and so, so there was a comment about thank you for charging transcribus. Is that I don't know whether that's transcribe. There is a free version of Transcribus. I do know that. I do believe we might have a subscription to that as well. So I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. So we have a little bit of a timeline here. Again, looking at the Prentice family. So we have in 1768, we know that Elizabeth Prentice had Judith and her children had gone to the household of Elizabeth Prentice. Elizabeth Prentice dies in 1770, and her death is announced in the Virginia Gazette. There's a little bit of a gap in time, and in 1773, the will of her brother, John Prentice, seems to indicate that the people in Elizabeth Prentice's, the enslaved people in Elizabeth's household, wound up in her brother's household, because in his will in 1773, he is making provisions for Pompey and for Effie and Nancy, along with a Rachel, to go to his brother, Joseph Prentice. Now, we have descriptions of Pompey and Effie. We know that Nancy Lewis was also the daughter of Judith. What we don't know is whether Rachel may also be a daughter of Judith and a sister to Molly. We don't have any relationship stated, but the fact that this family has been kind of kept together for a bit, it does make me wonder. That's just one of my wonderings, whether Rachel could also be a sister to Molly. But this is where we see the progression. Molly, of course, is not mentioned in the will, which gave me some pause and made me wonder kind of what was going on with Molly. And we were able to find out, and so I will share that next. But if anyone has any questions about this slide or about the process of kind of tracing the enslaved through the wills and through the family, the white enslaving family, I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Anyone? No? All right, I'm going to go ahead on to the next slide then. So what we see here is then the inventory of the John Prentice estate in December of 1775. And here we have Pompey, we have Judith and her children, Tom and Lewis. So she's had more children now. So now we have more siblings for Molly identified. And there's Molly, and then Effie, her sister, and then Rachel again. And so this is where we're able to track Molly to where she is next. So we know that she was designated for Elizabeth Prentice's household when Elizabeth Prentice dies. I've not found a will for Elizabeth Prentice, but we do know that the family was able to stay together and wound up in her brother John Prentice's household. So any questions about this record? We see the values given or stated for the enslaved individuals. It's interesting, and it's something that we are talking about in the lab, that Molly would have been valued at 60 pounds. And that's, we don't know whether the education that she got at the Bray School factors into any value for the enslaved. We just don't know. It's a question that we're asking, and we're trying to figure out without any real clear answers just yet. We do know that Judith now has 2 more children, Tom and Lewis, and that Lewis name comes up again, and I think it's significant. We've not been able to tie that to any one Lewis individual, but now that she's named one person Lewis, she's named Nancy, her daughter Nancy Lewis, and now a son named Lewis, makes me think that that's a significant name that we need to be kind of paying attention to. So before we move on from here, any questions about the process? Any questions about the records? Or any questions or observations? Okay, I'm going to go ahead on. I don't see any hands raised. Terrific. I'm going to go ahead on to the next slide. Oh, and we still have people joining us, which is wonderful. Welcome, welcome. If you are just now joining us and your Zoom screen reads Danny Devlin, and you would like it to be your own name, please feel free to go ahead and update your Zoom screen name from the name of our Director of Community Engagement to your own name. So, okay, education and ability to have children adds to accessed values. So thank you for sharing that. We do think that there was some thought that with the education that the scholars were receiving at the Bray School, the ability to read religious texts primarily, to be kind of part of that hierarchical Anglican Church obedient piece, but as well as the domestic skills, particularly that the girls were learning. They were learning sewing. They were learning there's some discussion about whether or not they were being taught to write. And some of the archaeological findings coming out of the archaeological dig seem to be trending toward that they were taught some level of writing. And so, yes, they would be, and also they were learning comportment, how to carry yourselves in British society. That would have added value for the enslavers, for those children having that education. What we're also finding is the children are going to be just like any children would be. They're going to take that knowledge and those skills and use it in ways that they want to choose to use it. And looking at their ingenuity and looking at trying to find those stories and looking at how they were using their education and not just how their enslavers were using that education. So thank you for bringing that up. So Molly is next mentioned in an interesting document. This is Molly. So Elizabeth Prentice now is a widow of John. So John Prentice had a sister named Elizabeth. His wife was also named Elizabeth. His wife is not mentioned in his will at all. She is still alive when he dies. And it was in this court document that we were able to find out about his widow and also find out about Molly. So I'm going to read, let me see if I can find the document. Let me see here. All right. Okay, so what I'm, let me see. Okay, so what we find, I'm not gonna be able to switch to that document, but let me go ahead and tell you what this. So right over here, we see that John Pierce, William Graves, and James Shields are the committee of Elizabeth Prentice widow, a lunatic, with James Southall, their security, acknowledge their bond for securing the said lands and for securing the said lunatic estate, which bond and ordered to be recorded. So basically, Elizabeth Prentice has been declared a lunatic. And so these men are now in charge of making sure that her portion of the estate is distributed appropriately to her. And so what we see on the right-hand side of the screen is the court document. And in that court document, we see that the following slaves were assigned to Elizabeth Prentice: Bob, Frank, Alex, and Molly. So we haven't lost track of Molly just yet. But this is an interesting document where Elizabeth Prentice is allowed to live in the household. She has particular rooms that she is allowed to use, and particular areas of the cellar that she is allowed to use. And these are her enslaved that are to be assigned to her. So I see some happenings in the chat, and there we go. Oh, I have lost sound and Elizabeth is frozen. All good here. You're back. Okay, good. Thank you. So this is an interesting court record. And this was actually, unfortunately, the last time we see a mention of Molly so far. I'm not giving up hope. We're still going to track her. And it's a matter of really figuring out what happened to Elizabeth Prentice after John Pierce appears to be her brother. This committee of 3 men are her committee. They are to keep track of the estate settlements. So it's a matter of figuring out and finding their records, and also finding out perhaps when Elizabeth dies, who manages the estate settlement at that point. So that, unfortunately, is the last we see of Molly. Any questions or comments about this document or about this part of the process? Oops. No. I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm not seeing any questions.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
there's one in the chat.
Oh, excellent. Good. Thank you. Okay. How old was Molly at the time she was transferred to Elizabeth? Great question. We're not entirely sure how old Molly, we don't know when Molly was born. We estimate that she was born sometime between 1755 and 1761. So if she was at the Bray School in 1765, let's give her an average age of, let's say, 7 or 8. Only because we know that the average age of the children from the one attendance list, that 7 and 8 seem to be the ages. So if that was in 1765 and this is in 1775, add 10 years. So then maybe she's going to be 16, 17, 18 years old, maybe. But when she was transferred to Elizabeth, yes, so Elizabeth, the widow, she would have been in her mid to late teens. We were going to we'll estimate that. But she could have been as young as maybe 12, 11 or 12. No, she would have been as young as 14. as young as 14. So thank you for that question. That's great. Any other comments or observations? So a teenager. Yep, exactly. Yep. And separated now from her parent, is from her mother and her sisters and brothers. Yep. All right. So unfortunately, as I mentioned, that was the last, yes, and able to produce. Absolutely. Good point. Yep. So a teenager, she's able to produce, meaning that she, yeah, biologically, she could be starting her own family. Yes, to Pamela's question. Let's see. Is this the same William and Mary Prentice who owned the Prentice store on Duke of Gloucester Street? Yes, it's all the same Prentice family. We know William Prentice was a merchant. John took over Dad's business, and then his cousin Robert Prentice also became part of the family business. So did she have one of those children, but not by choice? So Molly's children or Judith's children? Are we thinking that, let me go back. So is the question, so those we think are Judith's later children. Oh, so is Judith having children later, not by choice? Absolutely possible. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And it's an interesting conversation that we've been having as well, thinking, oh, wait, those we think are Molly's later, just a question. So is the question whether those later children those we think are Judith's later, no Molly, Molly is property. Who is guarding her? Who's guarding Molly?
Please.
Who's that? Who's guarding Molly? She has to come off mute. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm having a real hard time following the questions. So if you would like to come off mute, who's protecting Molly? Who's protecting Molly? Right. I mean,
Can you hear me?
yeah, I can now, yes.
I was thinking when you were talking about, I think you mentioned Rachel, I'm not sure at what point, but just other children. And in my mind, I'm thinking Molly is property. She's not just, if she's Judith's daughter, she's not just Judith's daughter, she's property. So we tend to forget about who's protecting those children when they come of a certain age. Judith will attempt to protect her daughter. It doesn't mean she can watch over all the time. So sometimes when we think those children belong to the older person, it's that teenage daughter. She's vulnerable too.
Okay.
So sometimes you got to broaden the way. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm just saying you got to broaden the way you think about it.
Okay, so the two people that I think maybe that I was saying were Molly's brothers could
Yeah.
Molly's,
You know, yeah, how old, yeah, like you said, how old is she? If she's
right.
between 14 and 16, she's old enough to have children. She's vulnerable.
Okay, so Molly, mother of Tom and Lewis. It's a good question. I'm glad you raised that. I will yeah, let me go back and relook at that. Yeah, if there's any indication. So, and how enslavers are going to mark that, and how appraisers are going to mark that may be very different than what's actually going on with the family makeup, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Yep, I'm going to mark that down. That's a good question. I will check that out. Terrific. Okay. All right, let's go ahead on to, I want to be mindful of our time together. from John Prentice's will, we know that Effie and Pompey were bequeathed to his brother Joseph Prentice. And what we're able to find is Molly's siblings as well as a new generation. What we see in back to the baptism records, we see here that Catherine, daughter of Effie, belonging to Joseph Prentice. So now all of a sudden we have another generation added. Effie, Molly's sister, Judith's daughter, is having her own family, and they're being and Catherine is being baptized in Bruton Parish. And this is in 1783. Also in 1783, and this is the great thing about the particularly 3 years of Virginia tax records, the property tax records. In 1783, in 1784, and in 1786. Some counties in 1785, but not always. The personal property tax lists include the names of the enslaved in that person's household. So we're able to see in Joseph Prentice's 1783 tax record, we see that Effie is here. We see again Rachel, who I still have questions about. We have Nancy, Judy, we have Ariana, an infant, along with a George and an Alexander and a Leah and a Hannah. What we don't know is where Tom or Lewis or where Molly is, but we know that Molly, we do know where Molly is. Well, we don't know. In 1783, we don't know where Molly is because 1775 was when the court assigned her to Elizabeth Prentice. Following Joseph Prentice's tax records in 1784, again, we have Effie and we have Pompey and we have Judith, we have Nancy, and we have Kate, Effie's daughter, here in the Joseph Prentice household. And then again in 1786, we have Joseph Prentice, Pompey, Effie, Rachel again, Judy, Nancy. We don't have Kate. It's interesting how sometimes the tax list makers will include some, won't include others from year to year. Could it be that enslaved are moving from property to property across county lines, and so we need to look at additional tax records? We're focusing right now on Effie and Kate and Pompey because we knew that they had a direct connection to Molly. So in 1809 is when Joseph Prentice passes away. But before we get to there, I just want to kind of give an overview of kind of like the path that we've taken so far this evening through the records. We started with Molly in 1765 on that attendance list. And through William Prentice's estate inventory, we were able to connect Molly with her mother and her siblings. Then we went and we had to track through each enslaver. So Mary Prentice, the widow of William, and that's when we were able to add Pompey to the family grouping. Elizabeth Prentice, the daughter, from the father's estate record. We also see Jemmy and Nancy Lewis through the baptism record. We were able to, from the estate appraisal with John Prentice, still see Molly together with her family. And then the court record in 1775, which just mentions Molly alone in the Elizabeth Prentice household. And then through Joseph Prentice, who inherited Molly's family from his brother, John Prentice. And that's where we see Effie, Pompey, and we're able to add Catherine, the daughter of Effie. So we're reconstructing this family tree. And Janice, you make a really good point. I need to look at this Tom and Lewis and see whether they should be considered Molly's children and not all of Judith's children and Molly's siblings. So I've got a note to look back at the records again to take a look at that.
Also, when you say that you talk about tax records, or you were saying about them being moved around depending on their age, they could be loaned out or hired out and then show up on somebody else's tax record for that time period. It's
true. And that's actually a really good point, because if they are hired out, usually they will be, it's still the enslaver who is paying the tax on them and not the hirer. But they would be showing up in other people's households for sure. So we need to look out and see whether they've been loaned out, hired out, and also double check all of the properties that the Prentice family owns to see if people are being shifted around based on either household needs, seasonal work, things like that. It's a good point.
The only other thing I'll say is people weren't honest about their taxes or taxables then, just like now.
That's true. That's true. And because they were going to be taxed on people who were older than 16, a
Mhm.
lot of times they're going to maybe try and have people look a little younger than they were, so they're not going to be taxed on them.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I have a colleague of mine or a friend of mine who's doing some work at Gunston Hall, and apparently George Mason was famous for fudging his tax records. So
Yeah.
yeah. Anybody else before we go on? Any comments, questions? No. All right, just a few more slides, but I did want to, we get this question a lot, and Shelley, I so appreciate you being here this evening, but I definitely wanted to, we get this question a lot, and my former work was with kind of more direct lineage society work, but I think I love these quotes from Shelley Murphy, that we are really looking at the entire family and not just the direct lines, because families were completely separated by slavery. And we're definitely seeing that when we see Molly's family and what happens with Joseph Prentice's estate. And so we at the Bray School Lab, we are looking at all of those collateral lines, because it is really important to really look at those and not be so focused on, oh, a direct line to a Bray School scholar, because it is really the community that was affected. And it was the community that was really kind of torn apart by the institution of slavery. And so that's why we're focusing not just on just the direct lines. So thank you, Shelley, for being here, and thank you for your wise words that I take to heart and carry with me. So we come to Joseph Prentice, and Joseph, being the brother of John, he wrote his will. His will was proven in 1809 and in June, and in July there was an inventory done of his estate. And his estate sale started in May of 1810. And this is where we see, let's see, we see, I'll move that there. We see Pompeii is sold to Benjamin C. Waller for $250. And we see Effie is sold to John Talifer for $80. So these would be the next two enslavers I would need to start looking at. And we just haven't yet at that point. This is really where the research is to date on Molly and her siblings. So we also see from we remember from the tax records, there was Alec was sold. Alec was listed in the tax records. Hannah was listed. Rachel, and if Rachel does prove to be another sibling of Molly, then we have Rachel and her child Lucy to a Jonathan Prentice. And so I'm going to need to start looking a little bit more carefully at Rachel if we can establish that she was also part of Judith and Molly's family. So in addition to the records that you see in the bibliography and in the Google Drive, there's a lot of other records that haven't made it into this presentation, but have definitely been part of the work. A lot of work was done before I ever came on board in March. We just started the genealogical work, my part of it, in March, but years before, a lot of really good foundational research has been done. So here in Colonial Williamsburg, by people who have spent a lot of time going through pages and pages and pages of records. And so I am standing on their shoulders and hopefully moving the ball forward on this, but I definitely want to recognize that this work is certainly not done by me alone, not uncovered by me alone. It is absolutely a huge, huge undertaking and a huge, huge project. And then we've got Research questions and next steps. These are the questions that I have. I'm curious to hear what your questions might be, given the records that we've looked at, and also some of the things that we've talked about. Any other questions that we need to really be considering? You know,
Who is this
happen.
John Telefarrell?
Yes.
Is he kin to Richard Telefarrell or Richard Tolliver?
You know, I haven't started looking at that yet, but I'm going to make a note of that to see.
We have a lot of Talaferros in our family. That's a
I've been
strong
talking with
name.
Mary about her Talaferros as well.
They're over in Gloucester too.
Okay, I'm going to write this down. Ricky, you said Ricky Talaferro?
Richard well, actually Richard Tolliver, but spelled the same way, was George Whiff's father-in-law.
Richard Tolliver was George Wyth's father.
With his second father-in-law, yeah.
Okay.
And so uptown, downtown, white, black. Some say Telefarrell, some say Tolliver. It's the set, but it's the same spelling.
Okay. Okay. All right. So Richard Tolliver,
Yeah.
John Tolliver, Talaferro,
Mm-hmm.
George Wyth's second father-in-law. Terrific. Great. And I know with Benjamin Waller and that whole Waller
Mm-hmm.
area, and that's your county, or is that James City County?
I'm not sure. Well,
Okay.
Whiff is here in Williamsburg, but the lines blur.
Right, right.
Richard Tolliver built that. What's the name of the house off of that's that Ironbound Road? What is it? Where the timeshare is? Tolliver's Kitchen, all the way to the back. Because Richard Tolliver worked on a lot of the properties in Williamsburg, and he actually built George Wyth's house.
Okay.
He owned that house, and he gave George Wyth lifetime rights. He never owned it. It went back to the Tolliver family when he moved and when his wife died.
Okay. Wow, I have not even started exploring the Wyth family just yet.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I am very mindful of the time. And so I just wanted to say, certainly, thank you to all of you for being here this evening. We're excited to have you be a part of this journey that we are on. We're going to be taking a break from the Zoom sessions in December, but we will be back with a new session in and a new scholar focus on Monday, January 22nd. Same time, 6 o'clock in the evening. Since you registered for this evening's session, we'll be sure to send out the link for our January session to you. But please stay in touch with us for latest news and happenings from the William and Mary Bray School Lab. Please be sure to check out our website. We are affectionately calling 2024 the year of the Bray School. The restored Williamsburg Bray School building will be opening in Colonial Williamsburg in September. There's lots of excitement in the months leading up to and surrounding that event. The research certainly is going to be continuing past 2024 as we work toward discovering the descendants of all the children who attended the Williamsburg Bray School. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and let me see, let me do that. Okay, stop sharing. Wonderful, great. Okay, so thank you so much for everyone for being here. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your suggestions and pointing out things in the record that perhaps I, had not considered. It certainly helps my work. And as I've said a couple of times this evening, this work is not being done just by me alone. It is very much a community effort. So I appreciate all suggestions. So happy to stay on a few more minutes if you'd like to talk about anything else in the records or in the presentation, but otherwise, that's what I have for this evening.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I also feel your pain.
I know you do.
I do have one question.
Sure.
Are any of those names that were listed, the Molly and it, are any of them actually Prentices?
It's a good question. I haven't found anything to suggest that at this point, but I don't have anything to suggest that that's not.
Because they kind of all kind of stayed in the family somewhat, which is not unusual, but you're also talking a different time frame too. I just wondered if any of them were, you know, who stayed the longest with the family, I guess might be the better question.
Right, right. Let me make a note of that. The Lewis, if I came across a Lewis Prentice, alarm bells would be ringing at that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've been looking on the lookout for a Lewis to figure out why that name is significant and why Nancy Lewis got two names and not just one name.
Yeah.
It's more than that though. You got to think about the makeup of Williamsburg. Okay. Think about those African American people who were here. What was their so-called status? What were the laws that were restricting them? How much movement did they have? How much were they actually doing? Because these people are being patrolled all the time. I'm not saying that people can't slip through the cracks, but the vast majority of the people in this town, there's some African Americans are someone's property. And when you look at the laws that are written to protect what people are doing, not what they're not doing.
Okay.
And when you look at the register for the baptismal records, like you said, you always have the mother. But have you ever noticed every time there's a suggestion about a father, especially if you might not be Black, it's not proven, but they can always state who the mother is. If you're so absolutely certain about who that mother is, you know who that father is too. Or how does that child look? It tells you who that father isn't a lot of the times.
Which might link to my question if any of them are Prentices.
Right.
Yep. Wouldn't surprise me not
At
one.
least all you need is one.
Right.
Really,
One
one of
job.
the women. And I think when you can determine Molly's age or any of those ages,
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to lead. And when we were talking earlier about the increase in having children, back in those 1700s, 12 and 13-year-olds were having babies. It
That's
was
right.
not uncommon. So I tried not to keep myself at the teenager. That's the 1960s, but not in the 1700s or 1800s.
No, because they're property. They do what they want with them.
And I hear Harriet Tubman in the movie, the one from a few years ago, and she's talking to that group and she's saying that they were waiting for that first blood.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I heard that again, listening to that, and I thought, 16, 14, 10, 12. Yeah.
Thinking also not just in terms of the patriarch of the family. Are you
Sure.
thinking of sons of the family coming of age?
Overseers, anybody
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overseers.
that had
Yeah,
access.
anybody who had access. Yeah.
That's right. And that's
the
why I
word.
said they're vulnerable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When it
But
becomes illegal
also-
for you to have cottonseed or cotton root, there's a reason for that.
But it was also interesting, and I don't know her name because it's under Danny, when she talked about who was guarding some
Yeah.
Molly, or who
Yeah.
was guarding the kid.
Nobody.
That was me asking that question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Janice.
and I thought about it. Nobody's guarding them. It's over who the holder is. Is it at his leisure,
No.
pleasure, taxes, labor, whatever it is?
Yeah,
And
when
I
I was
thought
saying
there's
when I
no
was saying guarding,
overseer.
I meant who was able to protect that child. No one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's
That's
my
what I
point.
meant by
No
that.
one.
Yeah.
Yes. No one. And
You're right.
it was a free for all. And even though we're talking about a school and around and all of that, I don't think that I haven't come across anything that would have restricted them to say who's protecting that child. Because again, it goes back to that property. And You guys, I was
A lot of
just
times
over
they're being protected when they got their eye on one that they want just for themselves.
truth.
Mm.
It's just so
So,
many different scenarios. So
yep, you're
Yeah.
right.
it was excellent, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
It sure
Thank you.
was.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you both for being here. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And I really, really appreciate the
all of you.
conversation. It really just kind of keeps me grounded and focused on all the different things that I need to consider. So thank you very much. So
Happy
there was-
holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Happy everything. See you in the new year.
Exactly. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Good evening.
You
I
too.
have one
Y'all
more
are great.
question, Elizabeth. I have one more question.
Oh, you have a
about the
question?
baptismal list.
Yeah.
You were using the Bruton Parish, and I'm looking at the First Baptist baptismal and membership list.
Right.
A lot of our family use the same names over and over, so you have to look at the year to see who you're actually talking about. And for Lewis, there is a Nancy Lewis and a Molly Lewis. So you
Mhm.
might want to mash up the First Baptist list with the
Bruton Parish.
Bruton Parish, because those members of that church came from families that went to
Mhm.
First
Mhm.
Baptist.
Mhm.
And yeah, so some of these names are coming up in groups on the Bruton on the First
Mhm.
Baptist list.
Okay.
Might not, yeah.
Okay. So, right. I mean, it wouldn't be necessarily because the baptism lists for
For
First
Bruton
Baptist started in
Parish,
the 1850s or
this
before.
says this is the death for 1885. Let's see.
Okay. But
So
you're right about
what I'm saying is they reuse the family names over and
absolutely.
over. So those families are right there from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
church.
Oh my
And
goodness.
this
Okay.
list says it was from 1865 to 1885. So it's not that far that
Mm-mm.
they wouldn't be reusing those names.
Right. No, we are definitely seeing that more and more. I'm definitely seeing that, especially with Aggie out of the Peyton Randolph
Mhm.
household
Mhm.
and a repeat
Yeah.
of the names. Definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even
There's
with John Tolliver,
Same people.
John Tolliver in our family goes John Tolliver, John Tolliver, John
Mhm.
Tolliver. And his wife was, his great grandmother was Leah Tolliver. And also Betty, who outlived 3 husbands. Her first husband was Fleming Brown. Then she married a Tolliver. Then she
Mhm.
married a Washington. And we connect to some of the ones in Newport News as well as King and Queen County. So those families, and I remember
That's me.
huh?
I'm sorry. I thought it was muted. I'm King and Queen, Buena Vista. Cousins.
Okay, my father was from King and Queen County, Overton. And so somebody named Broadus contacted me, and I know that he's related to me because when my father's mother died when he was young,
Uh-huh.
his father, James Johnson, married a Lucy Broadus. She outlived 3 husbands.
Wow.
So it's just
It's
wild.
It's
It is
amazing.
it is amazing. And I can see all these people that keep coming up because people are now taking the DNA test just
Mhm.
to see if there's a connection.
Mhm.
And I've got somebody that's a first cousin, there's a Nazareth that's in his family is from King and Queen.
Queen.
Don't know how they connected. However, it had to be one of my father's siblings because he's my
Mhm.
first cousin.
Mhm.
wow.
Wow.
Okay. And you said for me
Yeah.
to check your tree, and I haven't done that yet. I was going
Yeah.
over the break, so I will. Yeah, I need to pull that back up and
Janice, I think we're cousins on both sides of my family.
I'm not doubting it, not one bit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we are. Because I got some candidates on there
Yeah,
from
but
the King and Queen side.
I'm a Tolliver. I'm a Carter.
Tolliver is that's the guy
Yeah.
who contacted me. Tolliver from Newport News because he wanted to know about Leah Tolliver,
Mm-hmm.
who was a Hundley.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
you
all
probably
mixed up
should-
in it
yeah.
together.
Excellent.
Okay. All
All
right.
right, everybody.
Thank you. This was very enlightening.
It was. I love it.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you both for being,
Okay.
thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And I've got a lot of work to do tomorrow morning.
Get some rest though.
Okay. All right, everybody take
All right.
care. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.